Episode 4 of Coach Griff and I Trying to Chase Elite. And joining us today is Hunter Reeser, who's a special guest. Hunter was one of my first strength coaches when I was playing college ball, and definitely someone who was an influential figure. And during a time where I was developing a passion for strength conditioning, my first ever strength conditioning internship was 90-hour undergrad at Springfield football, and that was your team. And kind of seeing the way you operated and how passionate you were towards it was definitely helped me understand that this is a field that I wanted to pursue. And so kind of a full circle moment for me, which is awesome. And we appreciate you being here, Hunter. So.
No, I appreciate you guys having me. Yeah. Bringing back the good old days at Springfield, right?
Yes, sir.
Obviously you're one of my athletes, but also too, one of the interns. So yeah, you're right. Full circle moment.
For sure. I guess we'll start with, kind of provide a brief intro into yourself. I know you have a pretty big following, and a lot of people I'm sure know you, but for those who don't, where did your passion for the field start, and kind of where has it taken you today?
Yeah, so I guess really to go back years ago, back to my playing days in college. So I started out at a small Division I school playing baseball, Fairleigh Dickinson University. It's in New Jersey. Played my freshman year there, and then my sophomore year in the fall ended up hurting my shoulder. Not quite sure, how it happened. I think maybe just overuse over time, and ended up going through MRIs, all that stuff. Redshirted my sophomore year. Ended up having to get surgery on my throwing shoulder. And during that time, that's when I truly during the recovery piece was like, I may want to do this coaching thing, for a living, right? Could have been like the physical therapy route, could have been the strength and conditioning side, right? Because I loved obviously lifting weights, but also too, during that recovery piece, I was around a lot of physical therapists, athletic trainers. So I was learning the two ends of the spectrum. Ended up transferring to Westchester University in Pennsylvania, Division II school. Finished out my college career there, studied exercise science, and in my senior year, applied to go to Springfield for grad school. So was grateful and super lucky to end up at Springfield, just being able to learn from a lot of great coaches there. Both Fights and Dr. T, right, were very, very influential, in that decision going there. And then obviously during my time there, in the strength and conditioning program, you get to coach at such a young age, right, which is very rare at a lot of places. And, they give you all the autonomy to do what you want and grow into the coach that you need to be. And obviously they're helping you along the way. So that's kind of how I guess I got introduced into the strength and conditioning field. And then from Springfield, my second year in grad school, ended up getting the assistant strength and conditioning coach position with Vanderbilt Baseball. So once again, super grateful, super lucky for that, opportunity, and was there for about 3.5 years. And one of the best experiences of my life. Number one, from just being around just great quality baseball players at SEC level, but also too, just great human beings from the coaching staff all the way down. There was a ton that I learned, from just the humanistic side, but also the baseball side that I had no idea was actually a thing, even though I grew up playing it for 15 years. Right. So unbelievable experience there. And then last November, I ended up transitioning into the private sector. So now I am a director of operations here at ETS Performance in Clarksville, Tennessee. So we are a private performance center that trains athletes ages 8 to 18 and up. So we'll have some college athletes, some professional athletes, that want to train with us. So that's been a great opportunity too, a little bit different than the college route, but truly grateful and, for where I'm at right now.
What did that transition from, a big time Division I program to the private sector look like? Why? What are the pros and cons? Because, when you work at a place like Vanderbilt or in a professional organization, right, it's a lot of hours, it's a lot of time, it's a commitment. And you get the opportunity to work with the highest level athlete, but the private sector offers something a little different challenges, unique opportunities. And I'm curious, how that transition has gone for you, and what pros and cons you would say for those that are looking to make that transition in the field.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a lot of similarities between the two, without a doubt. When you're at the college level, especially at that SEC level, you're working with the best of the best, right? And obviously, being in pro ball, right, you're working with the best of the best. So, from a coaching standpoint, right, that can be easy, because a lot of athletes have been training for quite some time. They understand what they're doing.
Mhm.
Now, the private side of things is where I think it gets fun, because now you're working with athletes that are 8 years old that don't know how to touch their toes, right? So it's about, like, now you really got to develop your coaching skills and, teaching these athletes and kind of, dumbing it down a little bit, right, to make it really easy to understand for them. And I think that's been the unique piece. And that sometimes is also, can be a challenge at times, right? So the coaching piece, I think the college sector really developed, like, my technical skills, and now transitioning into the private side, right? That's really sharpening my human skills, right? Being able to articulate and communicate with these athletes on a whole different level, because they're at a different period in their growth and development than, those SEC athletes were, right? But one day, my goal is for them to get to that level to be SEC athletes,
Right.
But for me too, I think I've always kind of been passionate for, the business side of things. And, this was kind of a good mesh between the two. So, ETS Performance, we're a rapidly growing private sports performance company. And, I saw that there was some potential in an untapped market here in Clarksville. And, this was, like I said, the mesh between the two. And, wanted to just go and do it, right? See what it entailed. And so far, I mean, the athletes and families that I've been working with have, made this worth it big time. So there's a lot of great things that I learned, obviously, in the college sector, or else I wouldn't be here, right? Especially at Springfield and then at Vanderbilt. I mean, you can't put into words how much you actually learn and how much you're able to apply it to where you're at now. And sometimes you don't even realize that, hey, I learned this 5 years ago when I was in grad school, right? So yet again, it's like a full circle moment. So all the experiences I've had have set me up for where I'm at now, and really just continuing to stack days, and just continue to get better. How can I get better at the communication piece? How can I get better at the programming and coaching piece, especially with these athletes all coming in at different stages of their development, right? So that's the puzzle piece that's been really fun to figure out, right? And there's a learning curve to it, without a doubt. So
yeah. And you're obviously working with a different level athlete. And when you think about, or when I think about, you have a wide range of ages that are coming in. And when you're in the SEC, it's the same population. And I don't know how you guys did at Vanderbilt, whether the programs were individualized, if there was an overarching theme and you made changes based on the individual, their demands, whatever. But I am curious, like, how individual are your programs now? I know, a lot of this works can be general, especially with the younger guys. But when you're overseeing a lot of athletes and, they could be coming in at different times, I don't know how your schedule works. Is there individualization that takes place, or is it kind of, you have this general program that you're, teetering with based on that, that specific individual and the demands that they need?
Yeah. So I think it goes both ways. So essentially what we do here is, like, our first step with families and athletes that are interested in training with us is setting up an athlete evaluation. So it's about, like, a 45-minute segment of, myself taking these athletes through kind of, movement screen. And then we're going to be testing on our vault equipment, right?
Nice.
So what that session there does for me is, number one, it allows me to see how well they move, right? Number one, from a coaching or a coaching eye standpoint. And then two, we'll get them on our vault, equipment. So we'll do, we'll have them on our speed gates, and then we'll have them on our force plates. So that gives me essentially all the data I need. But that data really only matters if you use it, right? And put it into the decisions that you're doing. So what I'll do there is like, I don't want to reinvent the wheel with training. And I think general training overall is what these athletes need. They don't need anything fancy, right? But if there are a couple of things that I see that they lack, right, that's where I'll add it into their program that I maybe wouldn't have in another athlete.
Sure.
So to answer your question, a lot of our programs are general, right, at the end of the day, but there is sprinkled individualized, training and exercises that some of these athletes need that others don't.
Right. Is some of the data that you're accumulating and working with via the vault plates similar to what you were using at Vanderbilt, or are you guys kind of diving into different things, different metrics? Once again, obviously a different population, but was there any carryover in metrics and data that you value yourself that you wanted to bring with you?
Yeah, so a lot of the stuff that we test here is the stuff that I tested with the baseball players at Vanderbilt, right? So we would do an isometric mid thigh pull, right? Really just looking at peak force. We would do counter movement jump, looking at RSI, landing, asymmetries, all that good stuff. And then now what we do with our speed gates is we test our 10-yard dashes. We'll test a pro agility, and we'll test a fly, right? And the nice part about having this equipment here at your fingertips is like we can use it all the time, right? And I think that's an important piece with a lot of these athletes too, is to just gain as much data points on us or on them, so that we can program accordingly to what they need, right? And like I said, data really only matters when it improves your decisions, right? And the goal is clarity, and it's not like complexity. So we're not just getting all these data points just to have data points and not put them to use, right? Because at the end of the day, the data shows the truth of what happened. And now the coaching piece and the programming piece is going to determine what happens next, right? And whether or not, we're doing it the right way. But overall, like the testing is general in nature, I would say, right? We did it with the, elite SEC baseball players, and we're doing the exact same thing, with, a 12-year-old baseball player here. So it's just about how do we implement it?
Yeah. I'd like to take a little dive into like your thoughts on like the long-term athletic development piece, because you go from a place at Vanderbilt where you're working with guys who you might have for 4 years, where now you might have an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old coming to you, and you might be training with them for a long time, and like 10 plus years possibly,
A decade.
So yeah, right. So I mean, maybe you can't speak as much to this right now due to it being like a newer transition, but just kind of like, what are your thoughts on like the ebbs and flows of the program and how you see that continuing to develop as they age?
Yeah, I think the long-term athletic development model is something that I've really, really dove into recently, especially, now working with more youth athletes than I ever have before. And, kind of like you said, Griff, I could possibly have these athletes for 10 plus years. And, that's the part that excites me, right? And these are kind of the conversations that I have with those athletes and families is like, hey, we're 8 years old right now. There is no need to rush this process, right? So like my goal for you is, I have you for 10 years, right? And if we do this consistently, I just want you to think about the progress that we are going to make, right? So at the end of the day, like I'm going to slow cook them. I want to make sure that we are developing the foundation from a movement standpoint first and foremost, and then really get them outside of their comfort zone and outside of their box when it comes to the actual training that we do, right? Gamify as much as I possibly can, right? To number one, make it fun, but also to challenge these athletes in different positions and ranges of motion, that they've never been in before from a physical standpoint, but also from a cognitive standpoint as well. Like, truly get as much out of them as I can. And that's the hard part sometimes is like, I think from, I guess now, nowadays, right, with athletes and everything, like we're looking for that overnight switch, right? when am I going to make this progress? Am I going to make it right now? And, you know, that's something that we've probably all battled with before, is like, you know, looking for that quick fix. And at the end of the day, like, good things in life come with time, right? And you truly got to just stick to that process. And that's something that I've, you know, battle with every day too, is like not rushing the process. Like everything is meant for a reason. And you just have to stick to it. And that's one thing that I really try to inform and teach my, you know, athletes and parents, so that we can truly get the most out of their development that we possibly can.
Yeah. And I'm glad you, just to chime in, Griff, for you. I'm glad you brought up that point of, you know, early specialization. I know you've kind of touched on that in your post, but it's also something that's super prominent today. I'd be curious how those conversations go with parents that, you know, approach you and think that it's the best idea to do one thing year round at that age. But just on my end, like, I think about our Latin population and how quickly they go over to the facilities over there, the academies, and those guys are playing baseball and baseball only since a young age as well. And when I see them come to us and, you know, how many end up trickling up to the top, it just makes you think of, could there be a greater amount of those individuals making it to these higher levels of pro baseball if they had access to a variety of movement, sport, games, activity when they were younger? Now, granted, their situation is a little different, right? But it makes you think, like, this idea of early specialization is going to cap your ceiling instead of enhance it. And I think we see that a lot. And so you bring that up just makes me think, like, you know, would exposure to, you know, more variety, you know, help some of those athletes? Would it not? I don't know. But I think it's a conversation worth having, you know?
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, at the end of the day too, like, I'm not here to tell parents how to parent. And, you know, if they want their child to play whatever sport it is all year round, like, you know, go for it. Right. You know, my job as a performance coach, you know, when I have those conversations, is to inform them on the development that that athlete will get if we do something, you know, like this type of training, or if we maybe add another sport, you know, into their, you know, their lives. And I think, you know, when we think about playing multiple sports, or, you know, just sticking to one sport, right, you're leaving a whole bunch of skill sets on the table, right? Both from a physical standpoint, but also from, you know, a mental cognitive standpoint as well. Like, you know, when it comes to anticipation and, you know, stuff like that. Right. So I'm not here to tell them how to do it. Right. My job is just to inform them on what I personally think from a performance standpoint. And that also, you know, brings up a good point too, is like, if I do have an athlete here that is only a one sport athlete, right, and they do come train with me, right, how can I now get the most out of them by adding skill sets that they don't get on the field? Right? And that's kind of my job here. So you could think of this as being like their second sport, right? So that's where I talk about gamifying a lot of things, right? Competing, just getting them outside of the box that they've been in, you know, their whole lives. And I think if we do that, and they do that consistently, right, they're going to see a lot of, you know, benefit and development on, you know, the baseball field or whatever it is that they play outside of here.
Sure.
So it's still, I mean, it's still a topic that, you know, I'm trying to find ways to even better communicate, right, to really, you know, get families and athletes to see the benefit of, you know, playing multiple sports, or, you know, playing one sport, but getting the right training like we do here.
Right.
It's so interesting to see, like, because you can so easily tell who did and didn't play a
So
variety
easily.
of sports. Like, by no means was I like some fantastic athlete, but like I'm a decent, like, well-rounded athlete. Like, my wife only ran track, and I like to just like toss something to her, and
Can't catch it.
she's gotten a lot better. But like at the beginning, it used to be like,
Right.
you know, like, she's scared of it. She doesn't have any idea of, she just doesn't know how to catch it. She can't tell where it is in space. Like, she has no idea. Or like, Kate, you and I would just go outside and, you know, throw the football around, or throw the baseball around, like whatever, when your arm could handle it.
Yeah.
But it's just like, that's just like something we did. Like we grew up, we played a lot of catch growing up. Like, so that was just part of our development. And I think a lot of kids are just missing out on that nowadays.
Well,
Yeah,
and I think you bring up sorry, kid,
No.
but Griff, I think you bring up a good point is, we are now living in a day and age where we're just taken over by electronics, right?
Mhm.
And technology, right? And a big piece that a lot of families and parents come, into me wanting for their child is to get them off the video games,
Mhm.
right? And sitting still right after school, right? So that really forces me to truly make this environment for them the best it can possibly be, right? So make it fun, and also to like develop their skill sets so that they can continue training, and hopefully, stay away from the hours of video games, right? But like you said, the days of playing outside, are diminishing by the minute, right? So when I do have this opportunity to get these athletes, I need to make sure, that 45 minutes to an hour is the best part of their day, to essentially get that generation hopefully back to, the roots that got us here, right? Which is like playing outside, doing sports, all that stuff. So great point you brought up there. Just wanted to chime in on that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's so sad to me, because some of my best memories growing up are just
Dude.
going outside and like playing catch with my dad. Like random weeknight during the summer, we would just, we'd go out and play catch. Like we were always like, I was always outside playing catch because we had a yard where we could throw the baseball, or throw the football, or kick the soccer ball around. Like that was just something that was important to me.
Dude, that brings up does bring up a good point. And Griff, you'd be proud of me. I now have my screen time as a widget on my phone. So now every time I open my phone, I can see my screen time. Because I was one of those people that was spending too much time on my phone. But you think about what you aren't gaining while you do that, while you sit on the video game or you sit inside and you sit stagnant. And you think about what you are losing out on if you're outside, or what you wouldn't be losing out on if you're outside, training and playing. I think back, like we used to go, me and a few of my buddies, we play like 21 driveway, play basketball, right? There's all these different games. And when you play by yourself, everyone goes back and puts themselves in situations where, you're making the last second shot or you're hitting the last second home run. Like think about what that does for an athlete and, their drive to want to compete, right? Think about what that does from a young age. So we talk about early specialization physically, right? And we're outside, we're playing, we're getting exposure to all these different sports and games, and therefore putting us in different positions and loading the tendons, muscles in different ways, right? We're setting ourselves up to build a more robust athlete. At the same time, like think about what that does mentally, cognitively for that athlete as a competitor and as someone that, is motivated to compete and get better within their sport. And, so that makes me think back like to all those, times where it's almost dark out and I'm, I think I'm Steph Curry in my driveway, but like you said, those are good memories. And I think those played a role in, when you actually are put in that situation, you know what I mean? Like, obviously it's different, but man, I ran through this, 1,000 times in my head, so.
I think too, like that reminds me, I know you've mentioned this working with your guys, but of course at that level, they see this as a job,
right.
Where when you start, when you're the foundation of your athletic development is built on games and playing, you start to see it as something that's fun, which I think is a much, much healthier.
D3 athletes, coach, technically we paid to play.
We were paid to play.
We love playing that much. We
loved it.
Pay to go to school and play. That's how much we enjoyed the sport.
Yeah. And we thought we were being recruited.
No.
They just wanted our money.
No, but seriously, I think it's a valid point. And, it's definitely a challenge that you probably see a lot, Hunter, where it's a little different, at my level. And Griff, I'm sure you as well. Your athletes, a bunch of different stressors. They have class and tests and things of that nature. But, my guys, you show up to the facility, you get your work in that day, you play a game, you go home, right? That's work. So it's a little different in terms of, how can we create an engaging environment, but also, they're here all day. That time away from the facility is also going to be valuable for them. And I think this could be a good transition actually into a topic I want to touch on, which is the idea of more isn't always better. Sometimes it's just more. And I know you've been pretty vocal about this on your social media. You posted a lot about recovery and the importance of it and how valuable is a, extensive program without adequate recovery. And so I kind of want to, touch on the idea and the importance of quality recovery, targeted stress, and, where you would say you fall on that spectrum. Because, just from talking to people in the field and, kind of identifying through social media nowadays, you kind of have that, how can we get in, put in, the minimal amount of effective work to get the stimulus adaptation we want and get out, right? And then the other side of the spectrum is like, we're going to live in the extremes. And people fall on each side, people fall in the middle. But I think the idea of, recovery is somewhat underrated. And I'm curious, to hear your thoughts on it and how you implement it with, a different population of athlete.
Yeah. So I think it's a topic that there's probably a lot of different, rabbit holes and segues you could probably go with it. So, I mean, I guess to start off, right, I've come across a lot of athletes that want to do more to get better. Right. And that's the mindset that you want for athletes, right? You want them to be self-driven. You want them to want to get better. Now, from a coaching standpoint, that's where you really need to communicate this piece, right? And especially with younger athletes, truly, making it easy for them to understand, right? But when we think about, the recovery piece, the body's only going to adapt to what it can recover from, right? Not necessarily what it can survive from, right? So, if we continue to just beat it with, high stress intensity and just, fry the central nervous system, and we truly never get the recovery that we need, like our body's just going to go into survival mode at the end of the day, right? And are we truly going to adapt the way we need to? So, I like to think of stress as the driver, right? And recovery being the limiting factor. And then the training that we do is kind of the art of managing those two relationships together, right? So if the training piece is there, right, and we're stressing the body properly, right, we're not overdoing it, then that's going to allow the recovery piece to really take place too, right? And they're not going to go into that survival mode. So this is a topic that when I, talk to families, talk to athletes, is let's take a few steps back, right? Let's see the big picture, right? And one of the things that I talked about on the other day on one of my posts was the art of progress, right? And how that goes, and right, how we go in peaks and valleys over a long period of time. But, those peaks and valleys will trend up, right? And that's the body just adapting to the stimulus that's being placed upon it, right? Going through the fatigue, going through the recovery process, right? And, trending up over a long period of time. But more really only raises that ceiling when the recovery can support it. And less really only helps if it's purposeful, right? And the body truly needs it, right? If we do too little all the time, are we truly stressing the body to really get that adaptation? Probably not, right? So that's where the performance piece is, really building that tension between the two, from, the stress and the recovery piece, right? Making sure that we're stressing the body enough, right? But the training that we're also doing, is it also inhibiting or prohibiting the recovery piece, right? Because if we're just killing them with workouts and stuff, they probably are already going to be so tired, the recovery piece isn't even going to be something they're going to do, right? Because their body's probably just going to be completely shot, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like walking a fine line and really, looking for the minimal effective dose, but also too, I wouldn't say staying on the minimal effective dose for too long of a period of time, right? Because then we may be doing them a disservice and not getting them as much stimulus as their body can actually handle, right? So at the end of the day too, you got to kind of experiment and see where athletes are, right? Is this minimal effective dose just enough for them, or do I need to, give them even more, right? And that really goes down from, it comes down to like athlete to athlete, right? And where they are in the stage of their development. But also too, it's one thing to control the environment that you have them in, right? It's another thing for them to go home and take care of what needs to be done in order to truly recover. And that's the biggest piece, right? We can do everything we want from a programming standpoint, training standpoint, in-house. It's now about teaching them and informing them how to truly recover outside of it, right? Because we're only as good as our recovery outside of our training environment, right? And if we aren't handling that to the best of our ability, then we're leaving a lot on the table when it comes to development, progress, and all that. So biggest thing for me, and I think for us as coaches, is going to truly be teaching that and informing our athletes of what proper recovery looks like and how it's only going to allow us to continue to trend upward, right, in our progression and our development.
And does that conversation change? And does the amount of stress that you're applying in the gym change with a 12-year-old athlete versus an 18-year-old athlete? When that older athlete is going to have different stressors in school and things that are outside, maybe a relationship, whereas a 12-year-old, minimal stress outside of what they're doing in the weight room. How do you approach, kind of that conversation?
Yeah, and that's something I'm still, learning, right? And that's one of the learning curves here is, like I said, you're getting athletes with different stages of their development, right? Some being 12 years old, others being 18 years old, ready to go to college. So the 18-year-olds, right, can probably handle a little more strenuous activity, right? Just because they've been doing it now for a couple of years, right? Where a 12-year-old, you can't throw the kitchen sink at them, right? And expect them to be able to handle it, right? So it's about finding that fine line of pushing them enough where they're getting, like we're truly getting the development piece out of them, but also too, like making sure, we're not in here just to sweat, right? Like I want to make sure we do it for a reason. But the biggest piece to that is I have to know where these athletes sit from a day-to-day basis, right? So even for college athletes and, the professional athletes that you're working with, Caden, is like when they come in, asking them those questions like, hey, how was your day? Right. Because I'll get a lot of athletes that say, I'm tired. And I'm like, why are you tired? And they were just like, long day of school. So I have to kind of keep a mental note there of being like, all right, so I'm going to keep an eye on them here. Right. If I see that, their performance is dropping in any sort of way, right, I'm going to cut maybe a set of, their program for the day, maybe cut out, 1 to 2 sprints that we were doing, right, just to make sure that we're getting that minimal effective dose that they need for that specific day. And, this is something that we're going to constantly continuing to get better at. And it's a learning curve for, I feel like everyone is just asking them how their day was and kind of just going from there, because you can have a perfect program set, right, for, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever it may be. But 9 times out of 10, you are never going to follow that to a T, right? So, you're always going to be adjusting it, right? So that's kind of how we do it here in the private sector too, is like, it's a day-to-day basis, right? And the thing with that too, and kind of our model is that, at the college setting and the professional setting, you're on a strict schedule. Like, what days you are going to be training, right? With the model that we run is we could get athletes coming in at different days every single week, right? So it's never essentially a consistent schedule across the board. So I have to take that into consideration too. I could have an athlete that comes in on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So like 3 days back to back, right? And then their next week, they're in Monday, Wednesday, Friday, right? So, we talk about the recovery piece, they're coming in 3 days in a row, right? Obviously, I want to get as much as we can out of them from a programming standpoint and make sure that we're hitting all the buckets that need to be filled. But also too, like, I can't go hard for 3 days in a row, right? I mean, you can program total body, which is what we do, but at the same time too, like, their body needs a little bit of, recovery and adjusting. So what we'll do is, like, they'll train hard one day and then we'll maybe do like more so like a recovery type workout, right? Where it's not really high intensity, more so maybe just some volume with exercises, right? Kind of just getting the blood flow. So you could think of it, like a recovery workout. And then we'll go hit our, second hard workout day on that third day, right? So that's another piece that I'm still kind of grasping and getting better at, is like just the different schedules that happen week to week, and how can we change our program according to that.
Yeah.
This is one of my favorite parts about coaching, is like this problem solving piece, because it's just one giant puzzle that there isn't a true answer to, because if there was, AI would just do our jobs for us.
That's what you got to be a human at the end of the day.
This is why we exist. Like, this is why we have positions. But like, just an example here. Like, I have a sprinter here who, he's the biggest anomaly athlete that I've worked with to this point in my young coaching career. But he can do a quote like high intensity workout once, like maybe every 5 days, 4 to 5 days. And when I say high intensity workout for him, I mean like on Friday, he did 4 block starts over 30 meters. So he sprinted 120 meters, and he comes in yesterday and is like undergoing like debilitating soreness. So couldn't do what I had planned yesterday with him. Had to back off a little bit. Ran at 70% tempo. It's like, you gotta be adaptable, but it's fun. Like there's not like, 48 hours after this, like we'll be good to go again. It's like people say that, but it's like, that's not always the case for everybody. And he's a really high level competitor. Like, so his output is a lot higher than like the average person's. So it's a lot more to recover from for him.
Yeah. And that just stems the idea of you have to build relationships. And I think it's, why did we get into coaching in the first place? What are we going to remember? Griff, we had this conversation, like, I'm going to remember the relationships. I'm going to remember the people that I worked with, and not to say it's underrated or undervalued nowadays, but everyone's in search of the new thing, right? And we all want to consume so much knowledge. And that's very important, right? You got to be a coach, man. You got to be a human being. You got to communicate with these people, understand them, where they're coming from. What does their day-to-day look like? How are they feeling, right? That's how you're going to create strong relationships, build trust, and then therefore your program's going to be more effective. And I think, obviously it's going to be dependent on, sector and level, but it's almost like a lost art to me, being a coach. You know what I mean? Being a personable individual where the athletes genuinely enjoy coming in and working with you every day. So yeah, I think that brings up a good point.
Yeah. And that's something that, I'm truly working on here and like continuing to grow with, is the humanistic side of things. And I think almost like for me, the humanistic side of things and like developing the actual human being, has maybe overtaken a little bit more so like than the performance side of things, right? Because the performance piece is always going to be there, right? You're going to have the programming, the coaching in place, but like Caden, like you said, if you can't articulate it and develop those relationships, then what does the program actually mean?
Sure.
Right. And, one of the cool things, just being around younger athletes now is like, I want this to be an environment where these athletes come in and train to, number one, get physically better, but I also want to do my best to truly give them the skill sets that they need from a communicating standpoint, right? A development standpoint, a humanistic standpoint. And one of the cool things that, has happened over these past couple of weeks from day one to when we started to now has been athletes, forging relationships with each other, and some of our older athletes actually leading by example and showing the younger athletes how to actually do an exercise, right? If, I'm helping another athlete. That's the cool piece that really hits home for me right now, is just seeing the development from a humanistic side over a short period of time with these athletes, is really cool, because like we talked about, we live in an age of technology and, always on our phones or computers, right? So we lose the human connection piece, the communication piece with a lot of these kids. And for this to be an environment where they can come in here and they can develop physically, but they also can express their communicative skills with other athletes their age, develop relationships that they never thought they would have developed before, is truly the cool part about, the private side of, performance training and, having a facility is you're getting athletes from all over, right, the city here, coming from different schools that they never see on a daily basis. But when they come in through these doors, right, we're all under one umbrella, and that's where like the relationships truly blossom. And that's been the really cool piece, that I think is a good segue into, the humanistic side that you talked about.
For sure. And I think of Jay Schroeder, and Jay Schroeder is popular because of his style of training. It's different. It was new. He was ahead of his time. But Jay Schroeder's model pipes is holistic, right? It's touching on all aspects of the human being. So even your best coaches that, train in manners that are different and expressive and new, where you're looking at them and like, that individual is extremely intelligent. Even those coaches, right, are attacking their training and their communication with their athletes holistically. And you go work in pro sports, and I'm sure in high level D1 at Vanderbilt, it's a high performance model. You have strength coaches, you have mental coaches, you have nutritionists, you have this entire model and system where you're working and building and developing the athlete in all phases. And when you don't have access to those things, I don't know what you guys have access to there, but when you don't have access to all those different coaches and departments, right, how can you create a model similar to that on your own? And I think, that's definitely a unique challenge. And obviously I'm not in a position where I have to do that, but I think I enjoy that. I enjoy the personal relationship building aspect of coaching. And I think helping those individuals improve holistically across the board is enjoyable. So I think that's definitely a new challenge that you're facing. You just with where you're at, but I think it, prepares you to work with any athlete in any demand.
Yeah, 100%. And, just going back to the humanistic side and that development is that's one of the conversations that I'll have with athletes, especially older athletes that are interested in training with us is, what I tell them is you have an opportunity to obviously get really good quality training here, right, from a physical standpoint, but you also now have the ability to truly show younger athletes how it's supposed to be done the right way, right? So it's a lead by example situation, right? Because a lot of these athletes have aspirations to go play college sports, right? And if you want to go play college sports and you want to be that guy or you want to be that dog, right, you got to have the leadership qualities to do so, right? And I think it starts here, right, by showing the younger ones how it's supposed to be done. And, that's something that I'll talk about in the evaluation meeting is I want you to be an extension of, me essentially, right? Because you kind of understand, or you'll understand the flow of a weight room and a program probably a lot faster than a younger athlete will, right? So when you get to that point and I feel comfortable and you feel comfortable with it too, is I want you to help other athletes if they have questions, right? Or if, they're doing an exercise and you see them, you have my blessing to coach them, right? Now, if I see it and we're not doing it the right way, then that's where I'll, chime in and, help them out. But I also want to give them the opportunity to develop, those character traits and those leadership traits, right? Because, they're not always getting it outside of, their sport and, whatever it may be. So if I can create an environment here where we are establishing that and they're starting to generate that and develop that, that's only going to set them up for life, and years down the road, right? So that they can continue to be leaders in the community in whatever it may be that they're doing. And with that process too, I'm continuing to learn how to lead, right? How to communicate, how to get the buy-in, right? So it's just a never ending process for it. But I think this, our facility here brings that unique opportunity for a lot of these athletes, which is truly special to me.
Yeah. And I can relate to that because the team that I work with is majority Latin, also some, American guys that were, just drafted, injured and coming back from injury, et cetera, the high school kids that come out. And I've had I actually see it pretty often where, I have a Latin guy that'll go coach an American guy because he sees something and he's been in the system for a while. And I have an American guy that goes and coaches a Latin guy. And like, obviously it's through action because their communication is going to be hindered. But like, to see that's awesome, man. Like, you're developing a culture at the end of the day. And you have guys that come from two different backgrounds who speak two different languages that are now working to share a common goal. And, training in the weight room is only a small piece of that goal. But for them to help each other out and work with each other and challenge each other, especially in an environment, like professional baseball, where, you go to college and it's, a lot of rah-rah and, the whole team's there together, et cetera. But like, it's cool to see, man. And that's the stuff that's super refreshing, where you're like, you work so hard to build relationships, not just with the guys, but also from athlete to athlete. Like, you want to create an environment where these guys feel comfortable with each other. And like, that's the best. That's the best when you see
Yeah.
that.
And brings up another good point. So actually this happened last night, but I have a junior in high school. He's a football player, but he wants to get into exercise science. Like, that's, what he wants to do. And he was here last night at a 6 p.m. session, and he ended up staying for the next 2 hours after that. Right. And was just on the floor with us, helping out some of the younger athletes, right, with some of the things that they were doing, right? And just being able to watch that, like, that was really special. And I'm like, that's what my vision has been for a long time, getting this facility up and running, is like creating that environment where these athletes can have that opportunity, right? And, if I can continue to do that, that's all that, I mean, that's what really matters to me, is right. The performance piece will come, but is truly the humanistic development that I'm really looking for. And like, I've really, dove into over these past couple of months, but that just brought up a great example of like what I'm looking for, and to be actually able to see it come to, fruition is really, really special.
And I think we've all worked with enough coaches and individuals to know that the content, the knowledge, your belief system when it comes to programming and training can be developed. But one thing you can't teach is how personable you are with an individual, the environment you create, how engaging is your training. Those things are things that I think make a super special coach, because those are things that happen naturally. And I think it's easy to tell when you've worked with a variety of coaches and athletes, who has that. And so I think if I were to go back and, tell my younger self, what to develop, I would say, man, like, focus on being a good person, man. Like, connect with people, and everything else is going to come, right? I spend a lot of my time now diving into different things that I think are going to help myself and my athletes and my group improve, right? But to do that, you have to build a foundation of how can I connect with these individuals first? Because you can put out the greatest program in the world and you can continue to improve that program. But if they don't trust you and they don't connect with you, that program's never going to be effective. So once again, I think it's unteachable, but at the same time, like, you think about general to specific training, I think it's the same way for coaches, man. Like, focus on being a good person first, connect with individuals. And then after that, like, you can specialize in a specific area. You can continue to learn. Like, knowledge is out there. It's free. You can find it wherever. But I just think that's something where I do think it's undervalued. I really do. Really do.
Yeah, I would 100% agree.
What are you laughing at over there? You're making me laugh.
I'm laughing at you because I always know when you're diving into something, because you send me some random quote about whatever it is, or ask me a question. So I always know when you're.
I just finished up Jared Burton's neuro course yesterday, and can't say I fully digested it all. So I need to go back and look through it. That's my point, dude. You can learn anything, and there's so much out there to learn. But if I come to you with something specific that I think is going to be beneficial to you, and me and you don't have a relationship because I don't take the time to connect with you, they're going to do a half-ass. They always do. You know what I mean? So, question though, Hunter, are you on the floor a lot, or are you kind of like taking a step back and overseeing everything just in your role?
I mean, so this position, right, I have multiple hats when it comes to obviously running the business side of things, but also the coaching piece. So I'm still out on the floor as much as I possibly can be with these athletes, right? Because especially starting out, I want to make sure that what we're doing out on the floor is living up to the standard that I want, right?
Sure.
And that's the biggest thing, is like establishing that. But there are times where I may have to step out, to handle a business op side of things. And, I have my full-time coach who's able to hold it down out there, right? But the biggest piece too is like being able to communicate to your staff, right, of what you want the standard to be. And right, this comes back to, me, right? I'm still developing and learning leadership qualities, how to lead better, right? How to communicate better. And that's been a learning curve for this first, month, going into month 2 here. But yeah, I try to be as active as I can out on that floor, running around, coaching those athletes up, making sure that this is the best part of their day, when they walk through this door. And if it's not, then we're not doing our job. Right. And I need to get back to the drawing board and be like, how can we make this even better? Right. But also at the same time too, not just doing things to do things. I want to make sure there's a reasoning behind it and a process behind it. But to your question, Caden, yeah, I'm involved in pretty much everything as much as I possibly can be. And, with this position too, there's been a learning curve, right, that I've had to, I need to get better with time management, and bucketing certain, tasks throughout the day built around the training schedule and when our gym hours are. But also too, like the training for myself, right? Because I need to find time to be able to do that, because I need to show these athletes how it's supposed to be done. I need to be able to bounce out the gym, right, when it's time to do it, right, and show them.
Yeah, what are you jumping
all the
nowadays?
exercises.
Coach Hunter used to have hops back in the day, Griff. I don't know if he still does.
I don't know what I'm jumping right now, but I'm trying to stay a spring chicken if I can.
Yeah.
And doing everything I can. But that's the cool part too, is like we get so caught up in the programming piece that sometimes we can get away from like training ourselves, right? And at the end of the day, that is the most important piece, is like you need to make sure that you're staying on top of what you need to do, because you got to practice what you preach, right?
100%.
And I struggle with it sometimes, not doing a workout or doing it, at 50% intent when I know I could be giving it more, right? And if I'm asking my athletes to do it to the best of their ability, then I should be doing it to the best of my ability, right, if I want them to do that. So yeah. But going back to your question, it's been a learning process, but one that I wouldn't change for the world.
Awesome. That's awesome.
I think the last thing we kind of have for you is I just want to throw out a couple like hot topics in the baseball world, like of strength and conditioning, and just kind of get your like quick thoughts on it. So first one, like arm care routines, like where do you kind of stand with that? Like, maybe pitchers that have a specific arm care routine, they come in and do like a certain thing every day before they throw.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all starts with going back to a routine, right? As long as you can develop a routine, I think that's number one, the most important piece. Now it's about what do you involve in that routine. So I think a lot of times with, arm care and stuff, and there's so many different gadgets out there now, when it comes to all that, but like the real fancy routines with exercises that when you look at or you see on social media or you see an athlete doing it, you're like, what are they getting there? Right.
Like the terminal
when
elbow.
It becomes, what's that?
The terminal elbow extension.
Oh, I haven't seen that one.
Oh yeah.
Okay. But yeah, when you see some of these routines and like, you don't know what it is, and maybe that's, part on you too. Like maybe we have to do a little more research and, see, because there may be some benefit to it. Right. But sometimes with fancy routines, when they can become a distraction for, a lot of kids, and it distracts them from what they truly need. Right. And at the end of the day, you know, youth athletes, but also too, like your college and professional, you know, baseball players, they need strength, they need control, they need, you know, the capacity to withstand, you know, those efforts and intensities. And at the end of the day, you need consistency, right? And if you can develop a routine that's kind of built around those foundations, the simple things that are done well will beat the complicated, you know, exercises done poorly any day of the week, right? So if you can develop a routine that works well for you there and you're just covering all the basics, like you're going to be good.
Yeah. Next one, poles, running poles for recovery.
Yeah, this one goes out there a lot. Caden, I'm interested to hear from you too with this. But I think at the end of the day, it's not whether is it good or bad. I think it's more about, does it match the demands of the actual sport?
Right.
Right. And if at the end of the day, the answer is no, then maybe you don't need them in your programming. Right. But if you see that there's merit to it, right, and it does somewhat play a role in the sport, then, you know, by all means, I'm not going to say don't do them. You know, we never really I never programmed them for our pitchers and stuff. Now we would do tempo runs and stuff, you know, as more so like active recovery, you know, building up the capacity, but we never really ran full blown pulls, right? Just because I didn't really see much of a carryover to the actual sport, you know, being a repeated high intensity effort sport, you know, with minimal rest in between, right? So like, if that's the case, then maybe, you know, we need to do some repeatability sprints, you know, as a form of, you know, recovery or whatever it may be. So, Caden, I'm interested to hear your thoughts real quick.
Coach Caden loves poles.
Enough. Once again, I don't think anything is inherently good or bad, like you said. Do I think that, you know, steady state aerobic cardio is the best option post throw, or in terms of conditioning development? I don't. But you think, you know, after every pitch for a pitcher, you know, your aerobic system is going to be turned on for those however many seconds till you throw the next one. But I do think that there's better options in developing the demands that are necessary for them to perform at a high level. So when you think about pitching, and it's a high intensity bout that is quick, and then you have a certain amount of time to recover from that after, there's definitely conditioning options that you can do to mimic that. Like you said, repeat sprintability is an awesome one. I actually think repeat sprintability and just capacity work in general, like how much can you do without a velocity drop off, I think is an awesome teller of, you know, how long a starter can stay, you know, or go through the game without, you know, massive drop off. And obviously it's so multifactorial. To answer your question, if you have a passion to go run polls, go run polls. You know what I mean? Would I put them in myself? No. We do hollows here. So like, depending on time of year and day in the week for a starter, you know, you'll sprint a quarter, you'll jog the second quarter, you'll sprint again, then you'll walk. So we're essentially breaking up that pull into 4 parts. So I do think that there's, you know, more optimal ways. I wouldn't, you know, if it was up to me, I wouldn't program them. But like, if once again, it's about knowing your athlete. If you had a guy that came in from played college ball and he's been running polls and enjoys polls and he's passionate about polls and he wants to do them, like, probably not going to say no. We can just incorporate some other things around that. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
What about you, Coach? I mean, outside looking in.
Yeah. Like for me, it just really doesn't it doesn't pass the logic test. Like it just doesn't meet the demands of, I just don't think it's doing what people say it's doing.
Right.
So that's kind of where I stand. Next one, bench press. I guess specifically for pitchers, like I know there's differing opinions here.
Yeah. So I think bench press, yet again, it's like a neutral tool. Right. And it really just comes down to the programming piece of it and whether or not an athlete or pitcher can actually do it and withstand what needs to be done to do it right. Now, when we were when I was at Vanderbilt, right, all our pitchers bench pressed. Some would barbell bench press. Others would do a different form. Right. So dumbbells, you know, at the end of the day, it goes back to what do the athletes feel comfortable with and are we able to get every ounce of development out of them with that tool, right? So, I mean, we did have some, baseball players and pitchers at Vanderbilt that I've seen, I mean, that have put up 315 on barbell bench press before, right? Like strong. And I don't think benching is the issue. I think it's more so the misuse and poor loading of it that causes, problems. And people, when they say like bench pressing is not the way to do it, it's more, it comes down to, are you using it the correct way? And are we loading it properly the way this athlete can withstand that? Right. And at the end of the day, and this goes for any athlete of any sport, but like when we talk about baseball players and stuff, like those players get hurt more so because they are unprepared or underprepared than the bench press being the culprit, right? Like if a pitcher is not ready to withstand the intensity throwing wise, but like they bench pressed 2 days before, you could always go back and be like, hey, well, they bench pressed 2 days before, right?
Easy finger to point. Always. We talk about this all the time.
Yep. So, I mean, it's just kind of the reality of it, right? But it more times than not, like it's not the exercise that we did. It's more so that they're just underprepared for the intensity that they're withstanding at the moment, right? But you're going to constantly have these, these arguments and things, that pop up when it comes to like a high performance model, right? And whatnot. So yeah, it's another touchy subject, but I think it's a case to case basis, right? What works best for the athlete, right? And if, it's dumbbell bench pressing for, one pitcher and barbell bench pressing for another, then do it, right? So there's no one cookie cutter exercise that's going to get the job done.
And coach, I know you got to go in a second, but
I got one more too.
Okay. But one of my friends, one of my old teammates, he's a college baseball coach. And he called me the other day and he wanted my thoughts on the bench press because his pitching coach came to him and said that it's not beneficial for pitchers and because he doesn't feel comfortable with them doing it, et cetera, et cetera. And what I don't think is okay is a sport coach telling us what we should and shouldn't program without the background knowledge necessary to make an educated decision.
Sure.
And I think, and that doesn't here, it doesn't happen because we have, our model, it's a high performance model. We communicate a lot with sport coaches, but like at places like that, like, did he go out and tell you how to be a pitching coach? You know what I mean? So I think the communication there, where it's such an easy finger to point, needs to be better just across the board. You know what I mean? So the strength coach, we're barbell benching. Why are we doing it? Right? Or we're dumbbell benching. Why are we doing it? And as a pitching coach or whoever, you should probably have an open mind to why these things are beneficial. You know what I mean? Because that's not a bucket or a hat that you wear. So I just want to touch on that because it happened the other day and I think it was a good spot. So
yeah. And at the end of the day too, like just talking about pitchers, with bench press too, like the best form of arm care is going to be a strong, like well-organized body. Right.
Sure.
And everything else is more so just like the fine tuning. Right. So like if we can get the most out of these athletes, get them stronger through a modality like a bench press, then if we're not using it, I feel like we're doing a disservice to that athlete, right? So it's just about finding the right way to implement it and doing it the right way.
Right. Last one I have is the 60-yard dash. Explain to me why we're running in a straight line for 60 yards.
Well, I guess that's the end of it. I memean, I haven't ever really ran a 60-yard dash with any of my players before. We've always just done 10-yard accelerations, gotten their splits. We've done flies and everything. But I think at the end of the day, like the 60-yard is just the gold standard for what baseball players and like baseball coaches and scouts are just accustomed to nowadays. Yes. And maybe down the road, like we can continue to move the needle a little bit in the performance side of like, hey, maybe a 40-yard dash, right?
Are they still looking to go like 60? Like, are they breaking down?
I have no idea.
Because
Yeah.
like my only, and sorry to interrupt, but my only like thought would be with a 60-yard dash, you now get, if you see the splits, you can now see how well an athlete accelerates and how well they are at top speeds. You kind of get all of that in one.
Yeah.
But if it's just a 60 time, we're not able to identify how fast they are from 0 to 20, which Jungle said on the episode, our last episode, that he doesn't really care if you're not fast 0 to 10. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So if we're monitoring that and we're marking that, I think it's fine. But if not, and we're just using the entire 60 time, I think it could probably be done in a better way. Hunter, you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was always an interesting one to me. And it's just like, it's another one that just like, it doesn't pass the logic test for me.
Right. You never run in a straight line.
I understand like
Down
the goal is first to second or first to third, or sorry, home to second or first to third. But like,
yeah, in terms of the distance,
yeah, like
there's no curving on your
that's the
aspect.
only thing that makes sense.
I was going to say, yeah, I was going to say, so like if we are still looking for, to do the 60-yard dash in length, right? How could we maybe get it more sports specific where we're adding a curve to it?
Right.
Those are all things that, that's the part of like the performance side of things. Like, how can we move the needle, right? How can we maybe streamline that test to be more specific to the actual game and the demands of it, rather than just, a generic test.
Yeah.
That's like
Really,
that the
I
5
really think
is stupid. He's like, it should be a 4.84 because with the 5.5, you're adding an extra half step.
I really think that's just an example where someone was like, this sounds like a good idea. People started doing it, and then just we haven't changed it.
Right.
Just like no one's pushed back against it to change it. Coach,
I know, Coach, if you got to go. Last thing I want to do, which we've been doing at the end of our 3 episodes to this point, is want to ask you for our future episodes, like give us, 1, 2, maybe 3 guys, people that have been influential for you that you think we could learn from and that we should have on the podcast.
2's plenty. Jungle's already scheduled us out.
Yeah, I mean, our last guest, Jungles, gave us 27. So, and we are trying to get Fight on here. He's like,
I was about to say, Fight was going to be one of my answers.
We've been trying hard.
Yeah. I mean, Fight is definitely one of the ones that I was going to say, just because, he is an unbelievable, obviously he's got a ton of experience from a strength and conditioning standpoint too, but more so what he has done with the mental side of performance is truly remarkable. Right. And that's something that often gets overlooked, nowadays with, athletes and whatnot, but just like his level of communication and the way he speaks, right, is second to none. So yeah, I mean, he was the number one that came to my mind, especially being a Springfield alum, right? I mean, he would be a stud guest for sure.
Yeah. So we're gonna make it happen. We're working on it.
Yeah.
Coach, we got to bear down with your schedule and see when you got some availability and try to get him on here. It's just so conflicting with everything.
This over this break, I'll be able to.
Okay. Anyone else, or one we got to get on here? We got to talk like sports science with Blazowski.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, Mikey would be a really good one.
Yeah,
absolutely.
He's still like sports science focused over there with the Colts, right? Like a lot of stuff he's doing is working with data.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, he's a whiz when it comes to that.
He is, or from what I know. That's a good one. But honestly, man, appreciate you doing this.
Yeah,
full circle moment for me. Glad you got to meet Coach Griff. It was an awesome episode, and we'd love to stay in touch as you kind of move forward and we move forward, and hopefully at some point we can have you back on and talk about kind of how the facility has continued to improve and the experiences that you've had, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be down for it. You just let me know. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, brother.
No, it was a pleasure, guys.
Thank you.